Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Wallace here in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm an evolutionary epidemiologist with the People's CDC, here with an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we'll cover the state of global COVID, the state of U.S. COVID, and the new XBB 1.5 sublineage that emerged here in the United States. In the light of Damar Hamlin's cardiac arrest on the football field in Cincinnati, we'll also touch briefly on the impact of COVID-19 on young people, particularly COVID's cardiac damage. We begin with global COVID. In the graph in red, the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center reports us at 3.6 million new confirmed COVID cases worldwide for the week ending January 1st. The number of global weekly deaths there in white is up to over 12,200 confirmed deaths this past week. In green, we see global vaccinations up to nearly 80 million for the week. This New York Times map shows hotspots over the past week. The Western Hemisphere appears largely unchanged since mid-December in average daily new cases per 100,000 population. Although we see declines in Panama, Peru, Bolivia, and increases in Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We see a general decline across Europe, although it remains a global center of infection. Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand remain top-tier hotspots, while the Philippines shows an increase for the first time in our coverage. Australia is showing a decline. As we can see from these percent changes in caseloads the past week, rebounds there in the warm colors are still scattered across the globe. However, we see largely a cooling off compared to mid-December. In the Americas, we have sharp increases in Haiti, Colombia, Argentina, and Uruguay. While Europe remains an epicenter, it's cooled off a bit the past 2 weeks. Elsewhere, Pakistan, the Philippines, Taiwan, Uganda, Zambia, Libya, and Ghana show relatively sharp increases. We note the huge decline in China there in dark blue. We bring this up because in response to domestic pressure and from abroad, China rolled back its zero COVID program of targeted lockdowns and massive testing in December. Right on the heels of that switch, China appears to host a huge surge in COVID cases, its first since the original outbreak in Wuhan. It remains unclear the extent of that damage. Is it the 250 million cases estimated in December alone, including as high as 37 million in a single day? Or is it the relatively mild outbreak of only 3 to 4% critical cases and only 3 new deaths reported the first Monday of January? The Containment Health Index offers a measure of the combination of non-pharmaceutical interventions countries are presently engaged, like mask mandates, testing, and contact tracing. Fewer countries are reporting in this week. No countries that are reporting in are reporting more than 55 on the index. And this is all at a time when the vaccine strategy many governments say they're pursuing instead of these non-pharmaceutical interventions is largely failing. Much of the world is at best vaccinated for variants no longer circulating. We see uneven campaigns in booster vaccination across the world. On the one hand, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Cuba, Canada, Belgium, Finland, Germany, Italy, Australia, and Japan showed top-tier booster campaigns, with 70 or more people boosted per 100 population. In contrast, we see near nothing in Russia, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and those even reporting in from Africa, as well as mediocre campaigns in the US, Mexico, Brazil, China, and Eastern Europe. The CDC reports the US at a little over 15% of its eligible population 5 years and older with an updated booster dose. The collapse in vaccination campaigns, hand in hand with a rollback in the non-pharmaceutical campaigns that successful vaccination depends on, is occurring exactly when multiple Omicron subvariants are circulating across large expanses of the world. As of January 2nd, we see in some of those countries subtyping their COVID samples, largely biased to more high-income countries. BA.5 in blue still dominates in Mexico, France, the Netherlands, Russia, and China, but is falling farther back as BQ1 in salmon and XBB in purple are coming on stronger. Much attention is being paid to the new outbreak in China, including the possibility it may serve as a source of new variants. Even as a new XBB strain emerged in the Tri-States region around New York City in early October, as these maps from data visualization specialist Mike King shows, before spreading to the rest of the US and the world, including China. This isn't the first time the US has served as a variant incubator. The Epsilon variant first emerged out of Los Angeles in 2021, detected at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center on Beverly Boulevard before spreading across the US and many countries around the world. The BA 2.12.1 sublineage was first detected in New York State in April 2022. XBB 1.5 is a BA.2 offspring. As we learned on an earlier episode of COVID this week, XBB was itself a recombinant of BJ1 and BA 2.75. The more COVID is allowed to circulate, the more sublineages emerge, yes, but also the more recombination between variants is possible, accelerating SARS-2's already rapid evolution. Immunologist Yulong Kao's team reports that XBB 1.5 in the two red boxes here is equally immune evasive as XBB.1 there at the top, and at the same time on the bottom has a much higher binding affinity for the human ACE2 receptor the virus uses to enter our cells. One worry, as immunologist Kiko Iwasaki shares, is that XBB 1.5's increased capacity to infect cells expressing even low levels of ACE2 may increase both the kinds of cells it infects and the persistence of the infection. That may be in part caused by this double mutation in the spike protein, likely leading to the new sublineage's explosive spread, as disease modeler Jay Whalen showed here for New York State. New work led by David Ho's group shows on the top that XBB and XBB.1 already increasingly evolved out from underneath vaccine control and the immunity of previous infection. In the bottom antigenic map, we see XBB and XBB.1 is far away from the original COVID vaccine antibodies and breakthrough infection antibodies as SARS-1 is. SARS-2 evolution continues in such a way as, in effect, to produce a new immunity species entirely. The Ho team also shows that XBB 1.5's immediate ancestor, XBB and XBB.1, there in the red box on the left, is resistant to almost all monoclonal antibodies over the various parts of the receptor binding domain of the spike protein shown across the top. The monoclonal antibody medicine and vaccine results were reproduced in a different in vitro experiment by a team led by Prerna Arora. They showed even combinations or cocktails there on the left utterly failed to control COVID. Some vaccine runs on the right showed no neutralization whatsoever, even upon 4 vaccinations, including the bivalent booster. Turning to the US, we see from the Walgreens COVID-19 index that as of January 7th, national test positivity has exceeded the Omicron outbreak of January 2022, with over a third of tests positive for both rapid tests and PCR. This New York Times map shows COVID cases per 100,000 population. Spatially, the national caseload looks rolled back from mid-December. We see this especially the case across the north, from the northwest through the upper Midwest through the northeast, although less so there. Southern California remains hit, but not as badly. The Four Corners appears clearing up, as do the Plain States north of Oklahoma. On the other hand, the South, from Texas all the way through the Virginias, appears worse hit, particularly West Texas, Southern Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama, West Tennessee, around Atlanta, the Carolinas, and much of West Virginia and Virginia. The tri-state region around New York City remains an epicenter. Now, the People's CDC doesn't vibe with the way CDC presents COVID hospitalization data. It's largely presented there at the county level and doesn't differentiate enough across quantiles. So our quant team, led by Les Schaffer, is in the midst of experimenting with different ways to present these data. Here are the fractions of hospital beds filled by COVID patients across the 4,152 hospitals reporting as of December 30th. We see in yellow parts of the Northwest and the Bay Area, particularly harder hit, but also in the Houston area, Southern Michigan, Ohio, Atlanta, widespread through the Carolinas, up through the Eastern Seaboard into Massachusetts. The distribution may be a matter of a mix of what area of viral load is circulating, underlying susceptibility, and bed availability at these hospitals. Now, let's be very clear. The People's CDC has a lot of respect for the staff at CDC and Health and Human Services who help collect these data. However much we might object to the agency's leadership, we deeply appreciate the work that went into compiling and making these data available to the public. Other modes of tracking COVID-19 are patchy at best, given uneven coverage. We see the levels of SARS-2 virus detected in the wastewater that comes through our sewage plants, in some ways a leading indicator of the pandemic here for December 18th through to January 1st. We see that other than Oregon, Missouri, and upper New York State, nearly the entirety of the plants reporting in showed virus levels 60% or more in orange and red. However, the more acute measure of changes in sewage loads over the past 15 days perhaps better show transient dynamics, things that are happening in the immediate. And we see over the holiday season, those few reporting in show more of a mixture of outcomes, with Oregon heating up, New York and parts nearby getting blasted, and what was in Ohio red hot in the previous map, more a mix of plants heating up and cooling down. To sum up, here's the People's CDC version of our present community transmission by county as of January 5th, mapped again by our own Les Schaffer. The map shows the combo of caseloads and test positivity of the CDC plots, now reporting in only once a week. But unlike the CDC, the People's CDC differentiates the high level of danger counties are subjected to beyond 10% COVID positivity into high, very high, and extremely high exposure. Down at the bottom, we see that the People's CDC also differentiates exposure by both the percent of counties and by the percent population. Overall, we see a contraction here in the US. We see the peeling back we previously discussed from the northwest eastwards towards Minnesota and southwards down to the Four Corners, although that's filled in again a bit since late December. We see some areas still very much epicenters, including West Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, West Tennessee, South Carolina, suddenly Illinois again, and the New York City metropolitan region. But clearly Alabama and North Carolina appear blitzed. Late December, Alabama didn't report any cases at all. So we're not sure how much of this is really a state-specific outbreak or just a data dump of multiple weeks. Regional outbreaks rarely respect state borders this way. Regardless of the geographical shifts by population, the US remains in full bloom. We're at 89% plus of the American people and communities subjected to high to extremely high COVID exposure, with another 9% subjected to substantial exposure. The outbreak stateside continues to evolve, with here the explosive emergence of XBB 1.5 that we discussed at the top of our broadcast. BQ.1 and BQ 1.1 are still strongly represented, in some places more than others. Here's the 15-day trend of all the genetic sequences of detected sublineages in the US as of January 4th, including their geographic origins. As we discussed earlier, we see XBB 1.5 in blue, big in New York and nearby places like Connecticut, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, but also Florida and starting to fill in for the rest of the country, Virginia, the Carolinas, Idaho. We also see BQ.1 in gray and BQ 1.1 in red, also widespread. As we saw at the international level, multiple subvariants and sublineages are co-circulating together in the same locales, likely increasing the chance of the kind of genetic recombination that allowed XBB to emerge in the first place. And that's why driving SARS-2 population under its rate of replacement remains an important and entirely viable public health objective. And it's why the People's CDC demands a return to the kinds of full complex of interventions necessary to stop SARS-2. Vaccination is necessary, but not enough. So you think of it like a Rubik's Cube here. Yeah, getting one side helps you toward completing the puzzle, but it takes working through all 6 sides together to solve it. Vaccines, mask mandates, frequent testing, ventilation, sheltering in place when necessary, and contact tracing. Alongside all the support, people need to stay home through the 10 days scientific research shows people can still be infectious during. Now we're going to finish up with the implications of another game. Earlier this month, Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin suffered a heart attack midfield in Cincinnati. Now, given his youth, it wasn't long until various positions on the COVID question weighed in. The denialist position that blames vaccines for COVID, despite millions being killed by COVID before the vaccines were ever introduced, tried to say Hamlin received a COVID booster shot a week before. It turns out the so-called doctor that made the claim on Twitter doesn't exist. Those who declare with due cause that COVID is driving early deaths in young and old, including from heart damage, pointed out that Hamlin was listed as one of several players in the Bills locker room hit by mysterious illness a month before. Other articles I've read on the locker room outbreak didn't list Hamlin. The answer may be very well solely be the blunt force trauma Hamlin suffered that produced sudden arrhythmia and the heart attack. And we can leave it at that. But we should keep in mind that in previous COVID This Week episodes, we learned that while millions have died from an acute COVID infection, many have also died with COVID. COVID can damage multiple body parts as to cause secondary sources of acute mortality, including heart attacks. One recent study led by Su-Wen Xu put the inflammation and dysfunction of the endothelium here, the lining of the blood vessels, as driving much of the cardiovascular damage by both direct attack and indirectly by cytokine storms and the like. And these represent as much structural damage as physiological. Cardiologist Ray Duncan warns we are likely to see, quote, a tsunami of cardiovascular disease over the next few decades, end quote. In that vein, other cardiologists put the damage of long COVID in two bins. First, the immediate impact of chronic fatigue and the like, and second, the years-long threat of blood clots and strokes. Research from a team led by Evolutionary Pretorius in 2021 showed in long COVID patients inflammatory molecules such as hyperactivated platelets and high levels of alpha-2 antiplasmin concentrate in these microclots, shown there on the right, reducing the delivery of oxygen and leading to debilitating symptoms of long COVID, but also increasing the risk of stroke and heart attack, including in young patients. Now, treatment is possible. For instance, a special kind of apheresis may clear the clots. Blood from one arm enters the machine, which removes the clots and returns the blood into the other arm. Or doctors can administer a combination of antiplatelet and anticoagulant therapy. But this all depends on doctors recognizing long COVID is real and being up to speed on its symptoms and treatments, a situation long COVID sufferers have repeatedly complained about. Now, the shock of Hamlin's collapse is a loss felt since COVID's arrival, however much Presidents Trump and Biden declared the pandemic over. Other celebrities have served as such a marker. On a previous episode, we remarked on the passing of Julie and Julia author Julie Powell, who died from a heart attack a month after a COVID infection at the age of 49. Soccer journalist Grant Wall, age 48, suffered an aneurysm at the World Cup several months after a COVID infection. The other celebrities of a variety of notoriety here, all under 55, died of COVID or its consequences. Mark and Charles Seisler show that even as the number of COVID deaths in the US declined from 2020 to 2021, that's the third from the left in the top graph, with younger people dying, the number of years lived lost to COVID there on the bottom surged ahead in 2021 beyond any other source of mortality, an outcome likely to be reproduced in 2022. Look, the horror of watching a young person nearly die from a heart attack on the field is being reproduced in hospitals across the country. And it can be done differently. We don't have to do this. The Bills and Bengals union reps forced the NFL to first postpone, then cancel the game. Working people who organize can defend themselves against employers who place business before well-being. And that includes the Rubik's Cube of COVID. A bipartisan political class has just written excess COVID deaths into an expropriative economy. Here we have excess deaths in California shown across different occupations. And it's an economy that's treated as realer than the human well-being it claims to serve. And we can force a real government response using the full array of interventions neither administration has undertaken. In the meantime, with the winter spike upon us and the Super Bowl upcoming, please consider reading and using the People's CDC Safer In-Person Gatherings Toolkit at cusafer.org. We wish a swift recovery to Damar Hamlin and our deepest condolences to the families of all those celebrities and everyday people who have passed from COVID. And that's COVID This Week from the People's CDC. You can learn more about the People's CDC and read this week's COVID weather report at our website, peoplecdc.org.